What's up, everyone? Today we're talking about a pretty hotly debated topic. Should your knees go over your toes when you squat? This is something that a lot of people are confused about, and we're going to go deep into it and also talk about some common knee injuries like arthritis. Stick around. What's up, everyone? It's Physio Monday. We are absolutely pumped to have the effervescent Phil White sitting next to me. We've got Rad across the table, Richie behind the mic as the voice of God. Together we are Unity Gym and the Unified Movement System, where we turn driven people into athletes. You can always find out some of the key lessons and insights that we've learned over our decades of training people in our UMS blueprints. They're available on the website or in the description links. Big shout out to everyone listening on the podcast today. Big shout out to everyone tuning in and watching the replay on YouTube. But the biggest shout out goes to those people joining us live. How are you, folks? Make sure you get your comments in and questions in for Phil for Physio Monday. Question of the day: do you squat knees over toes? Have you ever been told not to, and why? How is it? I thought he was going further with that. I reckon Yanni Googles words to name you every morning because he's coming up with some crackers. Yeah, I'm good. I got tested for coronavirus on Friday and I don't have it. Right. Luckily, it is a cold, but man, was I not feeling good last week. So it's good to know that I don't have coronavirus. So I'm good in that respect, but I'm still getting over a touch of the man flu. Yeah.
I'm also well. I've spent a delightful 12 hours of sports yesterday, which is my favourite kind of weekend. So yeah, had a good time and ready for another week. And yeah, I think this topic today, like knee arthritis, is just one of the, like having, spent some time working in hospitals as part of my uni placements, like seeing people getting knee arthritis, knee replacements and hip replacements. Arthritis is like one of the largest causes of disability in our country and certainly around the world, but it shouldn't be. Yeah. So I think it's a great chat.
I think this is going to be exciting.
I'm excited. What is arthritis?
Well, I'm glad you asked. So for those playing at home, we're talking about squatting knees over toes, but this is coming off the back of a question by one of the members of the UMS Mastermind group called Renee Leo, who has done a big sort of question here and apologise for their English, but their English is definitely better than a lot of Australians that I speak to. So well done, Renee, as a second language. But basically, should we read out the question or talk about arthritis?
Yeah, read out the question.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
So,
some context.
Come on, computer. There we go. He said, I just purchased the 18-minute mobility routine, and I see that there is a lot of exercises where our butt has to be below our knees. So the knee angle is below 90 degrees, for example, the deep squat. I've been doing this kind of movement for a long time, and my mobility is pretty good, but I've recently been diagnosed with Gonar arthritis, which is not a term we use in Australia, but what that means is basically knee arthritis. So my doctor recommended that I do not do any movement that puts my knees under the 90-degree angle. The Gonar arthritis is still very early stage, but recently my left knee has been hurting so bad I had an injection of cortisol. It helped a lot to make the pain go away, but now I'm afraid about having pain again if I don't follow my doctor's instructions. I always thought that this kind of movement was good for articulation, so joints. I would like to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you. And then apologise for their perfect English. So Renee, great question. I think this is something that just comes up for so many people. As soon as they start getting knee pain, they go to see a doctor who will usually then go get them a scan, and that scan will come back showing some kind of change in your knee. And we've talked a lot about imaging and scans in the past. We've done a few episodes pretty much just on that. So if you do want to hear more about it, go back and have a look. But the really important thing to understand, and also with our pain science episodes as well, is that damage does not equal pain. So if you see something on a scan that shows that there's a morphological change, so changes to the actual structure, so bones, cartilage, ligaments, burses, all these things, there's no reason why, there's no indication to say that that's the cause of your pain or lack of function. So that might be a pretty wild thing to hear for some people, but there's so many things going on in the body that it's just not so simple to go, okay, you've got some changes on your X-ray, therefore now you are a injured person who needs
compromised. Yep, that's
who then
right.
needs to stop doing human movement.
Yep.
So that's the kind of big takeaway is like the if you go see a doctor, usually they aren't very, like they have to know so much about so many things that usually they don't have a great sort of understanding of musculoskeletal conditions, so their only tool is X-ray. And then when your only tool is X-ray, then...
Just quietly, before we go any further, Phil dates a doctor, so he has to be very careful what he says here.
No, I mean, like, it's been very eye-opening being like, whoa, you have no idea about just so much of this stuff. And like I've now...
And she's a good doctor too.
Oh, exactly.
She's
and like,
she's an emergency doctor.
Yeah, and with that friendship group, I spend most of my time with doctors, and it's like just kind of mind-blowing how little understanding they have of musculoskeletal conditions, which...
Yeah.
But then when I spent a whole year studying for an exam, and I totally understand why you don't understand it, because you have to know so much about so many things. So that's why I really encourage people, when you do have a musculoskeletal pain, so pains in your joints, your tear muscles, all those things, like if your country allows it, go see a physio first. And when I meant in America, you have to get doctor referral and other countries as well. Yeah. But I really do recommend go see a physio or someone who works with movement.
Yeah. 100%.
First.
100%.
So, what is arthritis, I guess?
What is arthritis?
Now,
I'm sitting back.
I just want to quickly, before we go any further, I just want to say that do not assume, because people really smash EDs and MDs a lot, and it's really, really stupid. And what Phil just said there is very important. These are the big guns, and they do have an insane amount of knowledge and education, but it has to be so diverse and broad that when you have a musculoskeletal issue, something that's wrong with your muscles, tendons, ligaments, connective tissues, or bones, it's recommended that you go see someone who specializes in that area, so that they're going to know.
And there are definitely doctors out there who do specialize into that stuff, either specialists or GPs with like particular interest. So there are definitely people out there, so don't get me wrong. There are some really good people, but as a general rule, I just see it so often that someone goes and sees a doctor and all they can do is like X-ray or MRI, and then they give advice based on that scan.
Yeah.
Just before we do go on, if anyone does have any questions watching live, please do put in the questions.
Get them in early.
Monday. Get them in early. Yep. We've had a few recently where it's like the show ends and then the questions come in. So, also, I am trying really hard to make things as clear and understandable as possible. So if I if I ramble on or not clear enough, please do ask for kind of clarifying questions as well.
Don't worry, that's what Rad and I are here for, just to bring it back down to a neutral intellect.
Yeah. So basically, with osteoarthritis, it's looking at changes in. It's changes in a joint. So a lot of people focus heavily on the cartilage component, because with arthritis, it generally starts with the cartilage as one of the passive structures in your joint. It starts to get some changes and some damage. But arthritis, as it develops, can then start to affect other tissues. Like it can actually get like thickening of the bone, because now you don't have the cartilage kind of protecting the bone. The bone then, as with the whole body, adapts to more stress and it will thicken up. You can also get changes to your ligaments, joint capsule, all of these things that start to change. But when we talk a lot about like what words mean on the show with arthritis, this is one of those times where inflammation is part of it. So the itis, whenever you see itis, that is talking about inflammation. And so it's quite an interesting one with arthritis, is it's when you start to get little bits of changes in your cartilage, that actually starts an inflammatory process, because now your body's got like the fragment of the cartilage or whatever that is now a foreign body, and it starts to try and like deal with that. And so that's where the inflammatory process comes from. And then that's where it starts to kind of cause other issues like joint swelling, capsule swelling, all of these things that really lock up your range of motion. So that's just a basic on osteoarthritis. Don't get too freaked out by the idea of foreign bodies in knee, but that's kind of where it starts, and then it develops on. But so many people, like this person Renee, I think has been told that they've got very early stage arthritis, and then been told to not ever do knees squat past 90 degrees, and I think that is so.
I had a little like somewhere in the world a squat fairy or a fitness fairy died when I read that. It was It was devastating, especially considering that the knee doesn't get a lot of blood flow naturally into the joint, and it relies on that synovial fluid sort of somewhat lubricating and servicing the joint, and that only occurs with movement. So the concept of bending the knee to full flexion and straightening again is actually quite important for the knee. But you think of it like I used to think of it like an engine. I was a mechanical engineer before a personal trainer. You know, the engine of a car has oil squirting throughout it to keep it lubricated, and some of the areas of the engine get less oil than others, and it's really important that oil is constantly changed when you service the car so that it doesn't clog up and prevent that lubrication from occurring all over the engine. I kind of think of the knees similar to that with the synovial fluid. You've got and what services it is the flexion of the knee. Is that movement occurring and that synovial fluid transporting nutrients and cleaning the joint and all these really great things occurring, where in the rest of the body that sort of happens with blood flow from the cardiovascular system. So yeah, knee flexion is really important.
100%. And when looking at I guess going into a squat where you're going past 90 degrees, you do need that next kind of like that sort of full range flexion. And when we think about what is supporting the joint through those movements, basically, as I just talked about, we've got the passive structure, so your bones, ligaments, cartilage versus joint capsules, anything that you can't contract no matter how hard you try. And then you've got your active structures, which is your muscles, and then the tendons that attach the muscles to the bone. So we've got basically, if the big takeaway is if you stop doing exercises that train the muscles to support your joint through the full range of motion, then it means that the muscles will no longer be controlling as much, and therefore it's going to be your backup systems, those passive structures, that are going to then take on more of the stability load. Because when you think about your ACL, your ACL and the PCL, the joints that, the ligaments that crisscross in the middle of the knee, all the footy players get the ACLs torn. You would have heard of that one before. And then your MCL and LCL are on the outside. Basically, they're there as your backup systems. But our muscles, so our hamstrings, our calves, and our quads have just such a huge impact on joint stability, and they should be taking most of the grunt. And it's only usually within ACL, it's when someone lands and twists or gets someone, pushing from the side that you get a tear. But usually it's the muscles in controlled movement that are going to be preventing that. So having strong muscles around your knee is so important, and you can, hopefully that makes sense, that once you've got a little bit of structural change to your passive structures in your knee, that should be like canary in the coal mine saying, hey, maybe our active structures aren't doing enough and we need to really address 100%. The strength around the knee. And
guys, this is why, and I'm going to get this word in before Rad goes on a complete run with this. This is why we developed the Foundations program and why we urge so many people to do it. Anyone who's done the UMS Foundations program will notice that there are 3 variations of Step Up, which strengthens the VMO and all of the active structures, glutes, hamstrings, calves, in a shortened or minimized range of movement first, to build this integrity before we start to heavily load through full flexion. And there's a very, very important reason for that. Why don't you share the progressions that we take people through on the Foundations program Step-Ups?
You mean why we do it, or
just share them? Just tell them.
So we do a side step up, and then a front step up, and then a step down, or a heel elevated step up. And
each one of them progresses the difficulty and load.
Do we do a side step up, then we do a side step up, then a heel elevated step up, and then a step down.
Yeah.
Because they each progressively add more load to the VMO and the the knee stabilizers.
And the knee stabilizers. That's exactly right. And like, I can't stress to you enough the transformations that I've seen in people with things like arthritis, like severe knee injuries and reconstructions, myself included, where I was told after my knee injury, where I had someone collide into the side of my knee that dislocated my knee and really damaged a lot of the structures that Phil just talked about, including a grade 3 tear, which is a complete tear of the ACL. I'd been told that the knee would never really, probably unlikely to function well again, and I'd end up with arthritis and all these sorts of things. And I had a little bit of the meniscus removed because the meniscus had torn as well. And, you know, if you saw me train now, it doesn't look anything different to the way I used to train. Of course, I spent almost a year building back up to the capacities and load and volumes and intensities that I do now. But, yeah, look...
I think this is like a good time to then talk about with the knees or the toes, kind of what impact that has on this particular case. So with squatting past 90 degrees for arthritis, but also just in training generally. And I love how the Foundations program, as Rad just kind of talked to the different progressions, it's all about gradually increasing the load. So it's starting with quite a small range and quite a small amount of weight going through it, and then each of those progression takes you slightly deeper and will load it up slightly more. And with the heel elevated, what that does is really puts a lot more of the force into your knees and your hips, because remember, whenever you're doing a squat, it's a combination movement of your knee extensors and your hip extensors. So basically your glutes and your quads, glutes and hamstrings, and then quads. So when you elevate your elevate your heels and go more onto your toes, that's going to put more of that load into the knees, and if you're flat foot, and weight into the heels, more into your glutes. So that's kind of, I love the Foundations program, is it's not starting you off being like, hey, do pause squats at Aster Grass. It's like, start small and then build it up. And that's the approach I think you've got to take with arthritis is, strengthen within your available range. If that range is really small, fine, but load it up. Start to really train with, you need to get these muscles strong. And then as you can handle it, that's when you start to explore a deeper range. So, and when it comes to squatting, I think it's really important. There's a discussion here about, should you squat with your knees over your toes? I think the answer is that there's different types of squats, and they're appropriate at different times. So, at one end of the spectrum, you got your low bar squat, where it's much more of a hip hinge movement, where you're sitting back, you're keeping your shins fairly vertical, and I find that's a really nice way to train people who are experiencing knee pain. And then as you go, you can do a high bar squat, which kind of is a pretty even mix of the knee extensors and the hip extensors. And then you've got your front squat, where the weight's in front of you, where it's so much more heavily knee extension and much less sort of hip.
Yeah. And I think where a lot of people need to understand is that the way that this would progress for somebody that does experience pain when they try and go past 90 degrees is that you're not necessarily going to always progress with weight going up and depth going lower. You might progress with weight going up, and then you get to a point where you think, oh, you know what, I can go a bit deeper than this, but you won't be able to maintain the same weight when you do that. That's progress. I think a lot, so many people equate this thing of, oh, if I go deeper and I drop the weight, I'm going backwards, and you're just not. Yeah. You're not. I've got people that I train in the morning. One of our good members, Jack, who's now a good friend of mine, when he started, he had some of the worst ankle flexibility of anyone I've seen in a long time, and he's on the good side of 30. So I'm pretty sure he's in his late 20s. Actually, I'm certain he is. And I just drilled it into his head that his goal is but he's got no knee problems, anything like that. I just drilled into his head that his goal is to go arse to grass with whatever weight that he can and drive his knees forward, use heel elevation as much as he needs to, but then slowly get rid of it as it's happened. And he's been here for this whole year. He started in January. And I was watching his squats, doing his testing this morning with very minimal heel elevation, going arse to grass, and he did 80 kilos, which is for 6 reps and passed the structural balance test at 80 kilos. I mean, that's amazing. Yeah. When and it was just this progressive approach. And there were times when we lowered we reduced the assistance. I mean, this is a little bit of a tangent because we're not talking about knee issues here, but it's this idea of how you increase range, and you don't always go up in weight when you increase the range. So key to
when you're doing exercises, you got to think about all the different variables involved, and range is a huge variable. So you need to make sure that you can't just be progressing everything in all directions. You've got to be really targeted about what you're doing when. So I love that's such a good point, Rad.
Yeah,
love that.
Yeah. And it's something that happens even with as experienced as we are in the room. And I've seen Yanni do it as well. I've seen you do it. I've seen Richard do it. We will still do cycles where the progress that we're looking for is definitely not in an increase in weight. It's an increase in range. And we'll play around with lots of different variables. Like I've seen Yanni using pause reps, with a lot less weight than what he can normally lift.
And looking at you, what you're doing like you're really focusing on tempo and how quick you're sort of, if you can maintain
right now,
the speed.
I mean, I've done my best squat was a double bodyweight squat, which was at the time 170 kilos, and I did 1 rep at it. But at the moment, I've been working on 130 kilos, but going ass to grass. And there's been a couple of weeks where I failed my last rep because I was so focused on keeping good tempo and going right to the bottom. And I haven't upped the weight for months now because all I'm doing is just focusing on that depth and on strengthening that depth. So
so with programming principles, so important. We've done quite a few episodes on it, so do go back and listen to those if you want to understand like what are those different elements that you change there. The last thing about knees over toes is I guess one thing that people kind of think about a lot is knee tracking. So that's just an important thing when you are thinking about going knees over toes. I don't know, there's kind of different schools of thought in there. Some people who are like, movement freedom, do whatever you like. But the general thing we look for is knees kind of going out towards your little toes. So either over your little toes but basically not crossing the inside of your big toes. So we want to try and stop our knees from buckling in, having them kind of going out. And that's just looking at how the knee joint works. It's a sort of complex hinge joint that does have some movement freedom, but you want to try and line things up and weight it evenly.
And the variables that will determine there's small nuances there in your specific angle come down to the hip sort of structure, the length of your bone structure in your lower extremities, your legs, in comparison to the rest of your body. Those will play a bit of a role. And then, of course, your length tension, like the strength and flexibility of all of these structures is going to play a huge role. So I just want to frame it up before we answer some of the questions.
I would really love to cover the cortisol injection really quickly because I think it's just so important when people are making decisions about their...
All right,
do that now or after?
Do that now, and then I'll bring this in.
Yeah. So he said that hang on, where is it? So he says he's in very early stage, and I think it's really important to understand that with early stage arthritis, you've got some small changes. I've talked about this X-ray study before, looking at basically someone with very early stage versus someone with end stage arthritis, and you'd look at one knee that looks like it's just kind of bone on bone. Nothing else supporting it versus someone who's got some very minor arthritic change, and you wouldn't be able to tell who is experiencing more pain or disability because it doesn't come down to how much damage there is. So it's really key to understand that just because you're early stage doesn't mean it's not going to be very painful, and just because you're end stage doesn't mean it will be very painful. Yeah. Like this person, Renee, has it said it's been hurting so bad that I've had an injection of cortisol. So with cortisol, it's a corticosteroid injection, which is a very potent anti-inflammatory agent. So basically with this arthritis, which is an inflammatory condition, it basically just sucks all the inflammation, not literally sucks it out, but like it really calms down the inflammation. So that can be like it's effective. It makes people feel a whole lot better, but you've just got to think that it's like it has long-term effects, and you can't if you continually do cortisol injections, you will get thinning of basically the passive structure. Like you'll get thinning of your cartilage, ligaments, and it does weaken the whole structure in there if you do repeated long-term. And there's been a recent study looking at that injections over 2 years of that compared to saline injections, so saltwater injections, and it's proven to actually make things weaker. So it can be a useful tool for professional athletes if they need to like really load up and get back to playing quickly, but I do not recommend it. Obviously work with your own health professional, but I don't recommend it for just a regular person who wants to keep training throughout their whole life. And the other really interesting study with cortisone injections is another one with a comparison to saline injection, so saltwater injection, so basically like it's a placebo. And the cortisol injections had a very similar result.
So the saline, you said,
yes,
had
the saline
result.
had it. So it's
massive placebo.
So there's so much placebo, like there's so much around just being in that kind of position where you're getting something medically done to you that's fixing your specific problem. Yeah. The context of a doctor in a white lab coat giving you an injection, like all of that shit plays into your brain, and it has a huge effect. Not saying that's a bad thing. It's great if placebos work, but 100%. We've just got to be aware of that and make sure that like it's. If you are getting cortisol all over a long period of time, like it's not doing kind of as much as you think it is, and it's going to make you weaker long term. Yeah, there you go. So guys, to bring this in for a landing, in regard to the preface, the name of the show, Squatting Knees Over Toes,
we've ascertained that it is absolutely important that we do learn to squat knees over toes. But the key word there is learn. And the reason why I use that word learn is because the body needs to, in many instances, if you haven't spent a lot of time in a deep squat throughout your life, you weren't born in China or in the country where Rad and I had to use a squat toilet for half of our life, then there is going to be a need to relearn this movement. Although we are born with a very nice squat, and if you ever watch children at play or babies at play, toddlers, they just squat all day, and it's very, very comfortable. It is actually a rest position for humans as children. We lose it over time. It's the old adage, if you don't use it, you lose it. And so my opinion with squatting knees over toes is that it is an absolute essential skill to maintain throughout your life. But if you haven't done it for a long period of time, there's going to be a need to manage load and manage and part of that load management is volume, intensity, and range. You don't just dive into it straight away because the structures there may not be quite ready for it. You may have some sort of compromise that needs to be dealt with, and you may need to
the dealing with in this case is just gradual exposure.
Just
most
gradual
of the time.
exposure. Yeah, that's exactly right. So the only instance where I say that it may not be a good idea is if you've had major damage to the meniscal cartilage in your knee and or it's been sort of removed, and then really excessive flexion in the knee can become a little bit more problematic.
Yeah, if you're getting severe, crunchy knees, crepitus, cracking knees is fine, but if you are getting clunking and locking of movement, then that's a sign of more serious sort of damage. But we're talking garden variety.
Yeah. In most cases, it is a really important skill to develop, and as with all skill development, it needs to be done progressively and it needs to be done properly. Go to a good strength coach, and they'll show you how to do the step up variations, or for God's sake, do our foundations program. It's all laid out there. It's a shameless plug, but I really mean it. It's important that you do it properly. Let's quickly go through some of these comments. Big shout out to Quack, by the way, for his front splits progression.
Yeah, dude.
Man, how sick is that
that's
looking?
Epic. Yeah, Quack started following us, I don't know if it was late last year or earlier. I think it was probably late last year. And started commenting on all our YouTube videos and asking questions, and he apparently was really stiff and inflexible when he started with us, and he ended up coming down to a workshop down here, and he come from Brisbane, which is, if you're in the States, it's almost 1,000 kilometres away, and he just posted a video of him doing a full front split.
Yeah, it's wicked.
Unreal.
William Wong, different trainers told me different things over the year, especially when doing heel raise squat. Good to get some clarification. Absolutely. And I'll be honest, William, years ago you were taught that it was a bad thing to do. The industry's progressed far beyond the old knees over toes fear. Now we do know that it is actually quite important.
Oh, the worst is we get people that come here, and when we tell them to find their squat position, they say, "Oh, but my trainer told me my feet has to face forward
and be
shoulder width
perfectly
apart."
parallel and all this crap, and it's just like, come on. I will just clarify again. If you have length tension issues, that means that there's weaknesses in certain structures, or the structures need to become more flexible, then it's going to severely affect your ability to squat deep, and probably affect your ability to go knees over toes. But it is absolutely impossible to do an ass to grass squat without your knees traveling over your toes. It's just not possible, and therefore it's quite ridiculous to think that they shouldn't, and we've framed that pretty well. It is important to do so. Lee Clements, having MRI tomorrow. Iliopsoas bursitis has been diagnosed, been doing foundations plus pancake on Saturdays, maybe arthritis spur. That's kind of a question for Phil here. She's saying, since laying off pancake, much less pain, getting second opinion, not a question. Bit thought I'd take cause of foundations program. My quick take on that, Lee, is that it happens a lot when you are really going for it, charging forward and consistently developing your flexibility. It's very easy to overdo it and push a little bit hard. We've all done it before. Be careful becoming too discouraged on that. You may just need to, as you're doing, take it easy on the stretching. Let yourself heal. Remember, if you tear something and you stretch it, you just continually re-tear that area. It's not the best thing to do. So That's my take.
Yep, and we've talked about this a lot before, but when you are new to a particular type of training, so consider your training age, how long you've been doing something. That will really dictate how quickly you change things, and also your age. I know, Lee, you're in your 60s as well, and so with like protein synthesis and turnover of structures and basically like hormonal levels of how much muscle change will be able to happen, that will also impact how quickly you change.
Yep.
So it's just one of those things you got to really embrace
Things
the process.
happen a little bit slower once we get beyond that sort of 40-year-old.
So impressed with how you're taking this on. So yeah, good job, and I hope that this injury doesn't railroad you too much.
And Nathan Campbell, I'm assuming, is saying, yes, my knees go over my toes, not my knees go over my knees, because that would be very impressive. Not sure I could squat without that happening. You're absolutely right. If you're squatting deep, it can't happen, mate, because otherwise you just destroy your lower back trying. So good discussion today. I really enjoyed that one. And I think there's a lot of value in there for people. Really progressively load the knees if you've got if it's a problematic area for you. If you're not used to going knees over toes, don't try and dive under there with stupid amounts of weight. Do it slowly. Use all of the variables at play. That means load, volume, and range of movement to focus on.
And I think it's so important when you are dealing with arthritis. The big thing to remember is it's not going to be like a smooth transition out of pain. It's going to be ups and downs, and you've just got to keep riding that, and you've got to embrace the process. Training with a little bit of pain is usually okay, but like I do really recommend people work with a professional on this, but it's not going to be smooth. Just like once you start doing a certain thing, it'll all be better. You've just got to embrace the process and keep training with
the only flare-ups. Sorry to cut you off. The only thing we didn't talk about, which I'm interested to get your take on, is I'm under the impression that nutrition plays a big role in arthritis. So that would be something that I would also look into.
Massively. And like nutrition for the inflammatory side of things, but also nutrition for the weight side of things. And within the arthritis, a 5% change in your body weight, or 10%, 5 or 10% can half your pain is the general takeaway. So because it is a weight-bearing joint, the amount of weight you're carrying around has a huge impact on it, as well as the inflammatory mediators with obesity as well have a double on effect. So there's so much benefit in eating right.
Yeah. So Renee, for you specifically, look into nutrition and ways to reduce inflammation through nutrition and ways to improve body composition. Look at strengthening the structures around the knee through a good foundations program. Work with a coach. If it's not us, it's totally fine, but work with a good coach who understands the concept of progressive overload and how to progress and program step-ups into your routine to build up those structures, and you will do wonders for yourself. Great conversation, great show. See you all tomorrow.
See you guys.
Health is about performance, not just body image.
You better be willing to accept what you're going to have to do to get there.
We'll start focusing on movement goals, strength goals, flexibility goals.
When you nail that skill, that's there forever.
The body image goal doesn't get you that far.
It's the consistency and frequency that's going to get you there. It's not the intensity.
There's no shortcuts to mastery and movement. Destination doesn't change overnight, but your direction will.
The gym is not the place to beat up the body that you hate. It's the place to build the body that you love.
We are the gym that teaches people how to move instead of just exercise, because we believe that health is about performance, not just body image.